The old pot landed in front of me with a hollow clank that killed every conversation in the room. 23 people went quiet at once. I could hear the refrigerator humming, I could hear my own pulse, and I could feel the heat climbing up my neck as Diane, my mother-in-law, a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of making me feel like a guest in my own relationship, stood at the head of the table with a smile so composed it looked rehearsed. She had just handed her daughter Renata a full-length mink coat worth somewhere around $4,000. She had just handed me a dented aluminum pot with a warped lid and a scorch mark on the bottom that looked older than I was. My husband Garrett sat 2 seats to my left, pale, absolutely pale, like someone had drained the color out of him. His hands were flat on the tablecloth. He said nothing. He looked at the pot, then looked somewhere past my shoulder at the wall, at nothing. I had watched him do exactly that for 3 years, go somewhere else inside himself when things got hard. But here is the part nobody at that table expected. I didn't cry. I didn't pick up the pot and leave. I didn't laugh it off. I sat there for exactly 4 seconds, let the silence do its work, and then I stood up slowly, smoothed the front of my shirt, and looked directly at Diane. "Actually," I said, "I have something for you too. My name is Petra. I'm 25. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I have worked at Meridian Auto since I was 19. I am a licensed mechanic. Oil changes, brake jobs, transmission work, engine diagnostics. I can tell you what's wrong with your car within 4 minutes of hearing it idle. I am good at my job. Excellent, actually. Customers drive 30 minutes out of their way to bring their vehicles specifically to me. I met Garrett when I was 22. He came in with a 2018 Subaru that had a knocking sound he'd been ignoring for 3 months. Left front wheel bearing, failing, maybe 2 weeks from dangerous. He looked at me the way people sometimes look at me. A half-second of recalibration when they're expecting a guy in coveralls and get a young woman instead. Then he said, "Can you fix it today?" I said yes. He brought me a coffee from across the street without being asked. When he came back for the car, he asked if I wanted dinner sometime. I said yes to that too. Garrett is 31, IT infrastructure for a federal contractor. Stable, quiet, occasionally avoidant in a way that reads as thoughtful, until you know him well enough to tell the difference. He makes good chili. He has a laugh that sounds surprised when it comes out, like it escaped before he could stop it. I fell in love with that laugh first. He has a 9-year-old son, Caleb, who stays with us every other week. Caleb is compact and serious, and obsessed with a hamster named Crumb, who runs on his wheel every night at 11:15, with the dedication of someone training for a marathon. Watching Caleb narrate his entire day to an animal that cannot possibly understand him, that was the kind of detail that made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. At least it did before this spring. Diane is not a cartoon villain. She's something more specific and more exhausting than that. She's a 61-year-old woman who has spent her entire adult life believing that love and control are the same thing. She shows up unannounced with casseroles and reorganizes our kitchen cabinets while we eat them. She tells Garrett how to load the dishwasher, when to schedule his dental appointments, what brand of olive oil is acceptable. She has never once said anything cruel to my face. Everything she has ever said to me has been wrapped in concern so thick you could choke on it. "Petra, sweetheart, do you really think it's safe for a woman to be working under cars all day?" "Petra, I read an article about mechanics and joint problems in later life." "Petra, stress affects fertility. Not that I'm pushing, I just want you to be informed." That last one was at Thanksgiving. Garrett was standing right there. He made a small, pained face and changed the subject to NFL standings. I stood in her kitchen holding a dish towel, feeling something I couldn't name yet. Not anger, something below anger, quieter and heavier, like sediment. When Diane called to invite us to Easter, framed as a casual family dinner and a small celebration for her and Ron's 27th anniversary, she said, "Just family, nothing formal." I believed her, the way I always made the mistake of believing her, completely, and against all available evidence. I spent my entire last paycheck, $460, on groceries. I cooked for 2 days: glazed ham, roasted vegetables, 2 potato dishes, a green bean casserole from scratch, a lemon cake that took 4 hours because the curd broke the first time, and I made it again. I packed everything into containers, drove it to Bethesda in my 10-year-old Civic, which I maintain myself, and which runs better than most new cars because I actually know what I'm doing. And I set it all up in Diane's kitchen, while she stood in the doorway and watched, and offered suggestions about the oven temperature. "You're so capable," she said. Somehow it landed like an insult. Dinner was fine for a while. Ron told army stories. Garrett's sister Meredith brought her boyfriend Douglas for the first time. Nervous guy. Knocked over a water glass. Spent 10 minutes apologizing. Caleb ate 3 pieces of ham and whispered to me, "Is there more lemon cake?" I whispered back, "I made the whole thing, so yes." He grinned at me with a gap-toothed grin that made my chest hurt in the best way. Then Diane stood up. She wanted to do something special, she said. A little anniversary celebration with gifts. She gave Ron a watch, real, weighted, the kind that gets passed down. She gave Meredith a bracelet. She gave Douglas, a man she had known for approximately 90 minutes, a gift card to a steakhouse. She gave Caleb a book about space that he immediately opened and refused to put down. Then she reached under the side table and pulled out a large flat box wrapped in silver paper and handed it to Renata, Garrett's sister, a tall, polished woman in her mid-30s who sold real estate in McLean and wore the kind of clothes that made you feel underdressed regardless of what you had on. Renata lifted the mink coat from the box. The table made the sound tables make when something expensive appears. A collective inhale, then murmurs, then Meredith saying, "Oh my God, Diane," in a voice that was half admiration and half something else entirely. Then Diane turned to me. She reached behind her chair. She set the aluminum pot on the table in front of me. Dented, scorched, warped lid. "I know how much you love to cook," she said. This was my mother's. The refrigerator hummed. My pulse was in my ears. Garrett went pale and looked at the wall. I picked up the pot, turned it over in my hands, set it back down, and something in me that had been very quiet for a very long time made a sound like a wheel bearing about to fail. "Actually," I said, "I have something for you too, Diane, and I think everyone at this table is going to want to hear it." I reached into the tote bag beside my chair. I had carried it in from the car and nobody had looked at it twice, because I had made sure it looked like just another bag full of things a person brings to a family dinner. An extra dish towel, a container of leftovers. Diane hadn't glanced at it once. I pulled out a manila envelope, legal size. I set it on the table next to the aluminum pot. "Before I explain this," I said, "I want to say something. I spent $460 on the food for today. That was my last paycheck. I cooked for 2 full days. I want everyone here to know that, because it matters for what comes next." Diane's smile didn't disappear. It shifted, the way a face shifts when you hear a sound in the house and aren't sure yet whether it's the cat or something else. "Petra," she said, in the soft voice she always used with me, "you don't need to make a—" "I'm not finished," I said. That stopped her. I don't think anyone had said those words to Diane in a very long time. Garrett's head turned toward me slowly, like something on a hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. I opened the envelope. I slid out a set of papers and placed them face up on the table. "Garrett," I said, "I need you to look at this." He looked. His face went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, then something I can only describe as a man watching a car go off a bridge in slow motion, knowing there's nothing he can do. Because Garrett recognized those papers. They were copies of documents he had signed. A mortgage on a property in Fairfax County, Virginia. A property Garrett had purchased 11 months ago, jointly, with a co-signer. The co-signer was not me. 6 weeks before Easter, I found a bank statement in the pocket of a jacket I was taking to the dry cleaner. Garrett's jacket, the account I didn't know existed, the balance, $41,000. Our joint account, the one I deposited my paychecks into, had $800 in it. I am a mechanic. My entire job is diagnosing a problem by following a chain of evidence backward from the symptom to the source. I spent 3 weeks following that chain, quietly, while making dinner, going to work, lying next to Garrett in bed, saying nothing. I talked to a woman at a legal aid office in Silver Spring. I paid $130 I didn't have, to a notary who helped me understand what I was looking at. I called a realtor Meredith had mentioned once who worked in Fairfax, not Meredith herself, and I asked, casually, about a specific address. The property was a townhouse, 2 bedrooms. Garrett had been paying the mortgage for 11 months. The co-signer was a woman named Cassandra, 34 years old, same federal contractor building as Garrett, connected to him professionally for almost 2 years, according to her LinkedIn. I found a public photo of the two of them at a neighborhood block party, standing close in the way people stand when they are comfortable with each other. I printed the loan documents, the bank statements, the photograph. I put everything in a manila envelope. I carried it into Diane's house in Bethesda. I sat through the entire dinner, the ham, the lemon cake, the mink coat, the aluminum pot, and then I stood up. "The paper's on the table," I said, and my voice was completely steady. I was amazed by it. "Are copies of a mortgage on a property in Fairfax County that Garrett has been paying for 11 months. He bought it with someone from his office. I've also included bank statements from the account he has been keeping separate from our shared finances. That account holds $41,000. Our joint account has $800. The room was so quiet, I could hear Douglas breathing through his nose. Garrett said, "Petra, I'm still not finished." Ron, Garrett's father, a retired army man who chose his words the way you choose tools, looked at his son from across the table with an expression I had never seen on his face. "I'm not telling you this to cause a scene," I continued, looking at the table, "not at anyone specific. I'm telling you because I wanted witnesses, and I want Diane to know," and here I looked directly at her, "that the pot is a nice touch. I really do appreciate the symbolism, but I have been building a case for 3 weeks, and I filed paperwork with a family law attorney 4 days ago. So the pot can go back wherever it came from. I won't be needing it." Diane put her hand flat on the table. Her composure, that extraordinary, decades-perfected composure, cracked. "Not all the way. A hairline fracture. You had no right to go through his." "The statement was in his jacket pocket," I said. "In our shared closet, in our apartment. I had every right." Meredith said quietly, "Oh my God, Garrett." Ron looked at his son. "Is it real?" Garrett didn't answer right away. That was its own answer. He pressed his lips together. He looked at his hands. He said, "Dad, it's complicated." "Is it real?" Ron said again. Same voice, which somehow made it worse. "Yes," Garrett said. The sound Diane made was small. It was the smallest sound I had ever heard her make. The sound of a woman who has spent her entire adult life managing every variable in her family, discovering that the one variable she never monitored was the one that mattered most. I picked up the manila envelope. I took back the bank statements, I have a second copy at home, and I left the mortgage documents on the table, because those were already filed with my attorney and I didn't need them anymore. I pushed in my chair, which was an oddly normal thing to do. Then I picked up the aluminum pot. "I'm taking this," I said, "not because I want it, but because I cooked in a pot this exact size for 2 days to feed your family, and this feels like the appropriate trade." I walked to the kitchen. I packed my serving dishes into my bag. The kitchen was empty. Everyone was still at the table, and the silence coming from that dining room had weight. I could hear Meredith saying something low. I could hear Ron's chair push back from the table. I did not hear Garrett. I picked up my bag. I picked up the pot. And I walked out of that house in Bethesda and got into my 10-year-old Civic that runs better than most new cars, and I drove home. The wheel bearing I'd warned Garrett about 3 years ago, the first time I ever spoke to him, eventually failed if you ignored it long enough. I had learned that lesson well.